why some people go completely quiet and what it really means. The person who disappeared. Think of someone you know who used to talk a lot, who used to laugh easily, who always had something to say. And then one day, they just stopped. Not all at once, gradually, like a radio signal fading out slowly, until one day you realize there's only static. You noticed it, but you didn't say anything. Maybe you thought they were busy. Maybe you told yourself they were fine, but they weren't fine. Something had happened, something that doesn't always have a name. And if you've ever been that person, the one who went quiet, you already know. The silence wasn't peace. It was a decision. What this video is actually about. We talk a lot about people who talk too much, but we almost never talk about the ones who stopped. In psychology, there's a pattern researchers have been documenting for decades. They call it emotional withdrawal. But that term doesn't really capture it, because withdrawal sounds like a choice made quickly, like someone who decided one morning to be quiet. The reality is much slower, much more painful, and much more common than you think. This video is about the people who went quiet, why they did it, what it cost them, and what it says about everything they went through before the silence came. If you know someone like this, stay until the end, because understanding why someone goes quiet might be the most important thing you ever learn about them. Silence is not weakness, it's protection. Here is the first thing most people misunderstand. When someone goes quiet, they're not giving up. They're protecting themselves. Psychologists call it emotional self-regulation. When a person has spoken, truly spoken, and found that their words weren't heard, weren't valued, or were used against them, the brain makes a calculation, a quiet, automatic, deeply rational calculation. It says, speaking costs more than it returns. And so, the person stops, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that saying it doesn't change anything. There's a concept in psychology called learned helplessness. It was first documented in the 1960s by psychologist Martin Seligman. In his research, subjects who were repeatedly exposed to situations they couldn't control eventually stopped trying, even when the situation changed, even when they could have acted. They had learned, deeply and physically, that effort leads nowhere. The same mechanism happens in human relationships. When someone speaks up about how they feel, about what they need, about what's wrong, and the response is dismissal, ridicule, silence back, over and over. The brain stops sending the signal to speak. It doesn't forget what it wanted to say. It just decides that saying it isn't safe anymore. A story you might recognize. His name was Adam. He was 26. 3 years earlier, by everyone's account, he was the kind of person who filled a room. Funny, warm, always the one who checked in on people first, the one who remembered your birthday, who asked how the interview went, who stayed late to help you move apartments. But somewhere in those 3 years, something shifted. It didn't happen because of one big event. It happened slowly. A friendship where he kept giving and stopped receiving. A relationship where he said how he felt, clearly, honestly, and was told he was too sensitive. A family where his problems were always smaller than someone else's. A workplace where speaking up meant being sidelined. None of it was dramatic. None of it would make a compelling story if you told it to someone else. But it accumulated. The way water slowly fills a room, so gradually you don't notice until you're already underwater. And one day Adam realized he hadn't said anything real to anyone in months. Not because he had nothing real to say, but because every time he'd tried, the response had cost him more than the silence would have. So he stopped trying. He became polite, agreeable, easy to be around. He laughed at the right moments. He answered questions with the right number of words. He became, in a way, fluent in a language that wasn't his. The language of people who had learned that who they actually are is not entirely welcome. What emotional suppression does to your brain. Here is what most people don't know. Going quiet doesn't protect the brain from pain. It redirects it inward. When a person consistently suppresses emotional expression, the brain doesn't release the emotion. It stores it in the body, in the nervous system, in the way muscles hold tension during sleep. Researchers at Harvard studied the effects of emotional suppression over time. They found that people who regularly suppress their feelings don't experience less distress. They experience more because the suppression itself requires continuous mental effort. Like holding a heavy door shut. You can do it, but your arms never rest. There's another layer, the amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for processing threat and fear. In people who have been repeatedly dismissed or invalidated when they express themselves, the amygdala begins to treat self-expression itself as a threat. Speaking becomes dangerous to the brain, not metaphorically, neurologically. The brain starts producing the same stress response to the idea of sharing a feeling as it would to physical danger. And the prefrontal cortex, the rational part, the part that says, it's safe, you can speak, gets weaker because it's been overridden too many times by experience, by evidence, by a long history of what happened last time you tried. This is why quiet people aren't just introverted. Many of them were not always quiet. They were made quiet by environments that punished honesty, by relationships that rewarded performance over truth, by a world that said, in 1,000 small ways, that who they really are is too much, or not enough, or simply not welcome. The thing quiet people never say out loud. Here is what quiet people almost never say out loud. They miss it. They miss talking. They miss the version of themselves that spoke freely, that laughed without calculating whether it was appropriate, that disagreed without bracing for impact, that shared something and felt, even for a moment, genuinely received. The silence isn't who they are. It's what they built to survive who they were around. And here is the cruelest part of all of this. The quieter a person becomes, the more the people around them assume they're fine, because quiet looks like calm. Withdrawal looks like contentment. Absence looks like independence. So no one asks. And the person who needed to be asked learns to need it less. Adam eventually left the city, not dramatically, not with a speech or a confrontation. He just quietly transferred to another office, quietly moved to a smaller apartment in a different neighborhood, quietly stopped appearing at the gatherings he used to organize. And the people who knew him, most of them noticed eventually. But by then, the distance was too wide to cross with a text message. and none of them was sure he wanted them to try. That's the final stage of emotional withdrawal, when the person has been quiet for so long that the silence starts to feel like identity, when they stop remembering what they sounded like before they learn to disappear. For the quiet ones and the people around them, if you are the quiet one, I want you to hear something. The silence you built was not weakness. It was the most rational response to an irrational amount of pain. Your brain did exactly what brains do. It learned. It adapted. It protected you. But protection has a cost, and at some point, the armor becomes the prison. The version of you that used to speak freely, it didn't disappear. It's still there, waiting for an environment safe enough to come back to. And if you are the person who knows someone quiet, someone who used to be different, someone who faded so gradually you almost didn't notice, don't ask them what's wrong. They've been asked that in ways that didn't feel safe. Just be consistent. Just be the kind of presence that doesn't punish honesty, that doesn't need them to be fine, that can sit in the quiet without making it feel like something to fix. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not a grand gesture, not the perfect words, just someone who stays, who doesn't leave when the conversation gets real, who makes the silence feel a little less necessary.